Hi, I'm Molly Matthews. Welcome to Job IQ Outside the Box. Today we're talking with Leslie Cooper, who is a clinical psychologist. Hi, Leslie.
Hello.
Thanks for being here.
You are very welcome.
Now, most of the people I interview for this are people that I know, so I know their story. I know very little about you. I know a little bit what you've just shared, but do you want to start by telling us what you do currently?
Sure. I am a clinical psychologist, which means that I work with people's problems.
Okay.
I am now semi-retired, so I am in private practice about 2.5 days a week in Friendship Heights. Prior to that, I worked at Walter Reed for 11 years, and I was the sole psychologist working with cancer patients and their family members and our returning soldiers.
And Walter Reed is our local, or it's really our national
Walter Reed
military hospital.
is the flagship military hospital in the United States.
Exactly. So, tell us first how you came to be a psychologist at Walter Reed.
You know, what I like about your idea is that that really work and jobs and career holds a certain serendipity. You know, you have to sort of imagine that anything can happen, and if anything could happen, maybe you should say yes to it. So it's a very strange long road. I dropped out of college after 2 years, and my father said, if you drop out, you'll never go back to college, but I was a stubborn cuss. And I went really from that to being one of 4 writers of the original Jeopardy!
Well, that's quite an interesting career switch.
And even prior to that, I spent a year as a secretary for Playboy magazine in Chicago before I moved back.
Which was more fun, writing for Jeopardy! Or secretary of Playboy?
Both were really a lot of fun.
Were they?
Yeah, so I and 3 other writers wrote the original Jeopardy! And at that time, in '74, the first female network executive, Lynn Boland, came on board to NBC, and she changed the whole face of daytime television. She put sex into soap operas, and she canceled Jeopardy! And at that time,
Wow.
television was moving from New York to LA. So I moved to LA and wrote daytime television. I wrote game shows and kids shows and quit in '78.
So I just have to ask you, because we actually play a family Jeopardy! Every holiday, where we do Jeopardy! About different people, and it gets very competitive. What makes Jeopardy! So magical?
Well, you know, the Jeopardy! That I wrote with
Yeah.
my other colleagues was daytime. So the questions that we asked were really for people that were living, you know, daytime.
Yeah.
You know, they were relatively simplistic.
Mm-hmm.
When it moved to primetime with Alex Trebek, people like the challenge.
Yeah.
They really like the challenge.
We're off track a little bit, but anyway, so first of all, my theory on people that drop out of college is that they're the ones we want to watch, because I think they're the people that are ultimately, there's some moxie to them, that they are not going to do something that bores them, or
Right.
they're going to find
Right.
their niche. And so oftentimes college dropout ultimately equates with some very interesting career paths.
Right.
So you are now in LA.
I was in LA, and actually what had happened is I had written a children's show for Hanna-Barbera, and I was the associate producer, and after the second draft of the script, they fired me, and I was devastated, and I went into a really bad writer's block for 2 years. I only found out years later that was what Hanna-Barbera did. They hired somebody from the Writers Guild, had them do the first or second draft of the script, fired them, and then had animation finish it because it was cheaper for them.
That sounds like very bad karma for those folks. That
It was
decision.
Hollywood in those days.
Yes, exactly.
So for 2 years, I really was stymied because I wanted to write. I love stories, which is why I do what I do today.
Yeah.
And then I decided, well, you know, if I want to write, maybe what I should do is go back to school because it'll force me to write.
Yeah.
So in 1980, I went back to school and I went to UCLA. And right from the beginning, I went straight through from finishing up undergraduate to graduate school and got my PhD at the age of 52 in 1996.
And that was in psychology.
as a psychologist.
Psychologist. You know, my theory also, in addition to a theory on people that drop out of college, I think one of the best things that ever happens to someone ultimately is getting fired.
Yes.
It's unfortunate that it was a setback for you. And the other, I've just had some recent writing experiences where I've had two completely different responses to my writing. One was just enthusiasm, oh, go
Right.
publish, and the other
Right.
one is you'll never,
Right.
keep it back.
Right.
So that's also interesting, is how I think as we get more mature, we begin to judge more individually ourselves rather than let other people.
Absolutely, and I think that I think that what was important about that experience is that what happens is when we lose a job, our immediate instinct is to blame ourselves.
Mm-hmm.
And in this case, it had nothing to do with me. And I think many times it's true for many of us.
Absolutely.
When we lose jobs, that our first instinct is to blame ourselves. We go into a depression, it paralyzes us,
Yes.
and then we don't go forward.
Yes.
And so I think it's important to remember that there are external factors.
So now I want to go into, so you get this degree. It took you a while. You were doing other things.
Well, first of all, to get a PhD from a research school like UCLA,
It takes a long
it
time.
takes a very long time. You do a dissertation, it's very involved. So it took me a very long time.
And were you doing other jobs at that time or not?
Well, and partially because I wasn't licensed yet. So I did things to supplement it. I did things to learn about the area that I was interested in. So I worked with the homeless, mentally ill, substance abusers in Santa Monica. I worked in South Central LA and community in Watts and Compton. And so I had a variety of different positions until I got that PhD. But it was also a wonderful experience because it gave me so much of an understanding of human behavior because it was across the board.
Yeah. And what was your PhD in? What did you study?
My PhD was clinical, but my area of specialty was severe mental illness, substance abuse, and trauma. So I worked with the worst populations.
And have you continued to do that? And how has this brought you to the place where you're still able, a lot of people that I interview would like to cut back. They don't want to work full time any longer, but sometimes there's not a space in whatever career path they're in to do that. You managed to make that happen.
Well, so my area was severe mental illness, substance abuse, and trauma. I wrote the white paper for the state of California on that. That was my area. When it became clear to me that I A, miss the East Coast, and B, there's only so much misery that you can handle of that nature, working with violence and poverty and all. A dear friend told me that there was a job opening at Walter Reed as the psychologist for the Breast Care Center. I had no experience with cancer, but I interviewed and I got the job. Right, and so, again, as it was when I was in LA, and my best teachers were my patients. My best teachers, again, were my patients,
Mm-hmm.
and listening to the doctors and nurses. But the patients really taught me about cancer. And so, slowly over time, I went from being the psychologist for the Breast Care Center to the Prostate Center to gynecologic oncology to hematology oncology. And they were all wonderful, wonderful teachers.
People that are listening to this and watching this are thinking about changing careers, retiring, pivoting. We interview people that have gone from doing one thing to something that's the complete opposite of what they've been doing. What has your personal journey been as you've looked at your career? Obviously, you still love it and want to do it. What led you to decide to cut back but stay in your field?
I felt that I had, there was no question that I love clinical work. I love stories. The work is really, I love it.
Yeah.
I felt that I had developed the psycho-oncology program at Walter Reed. And there is a time when it's time to go and to let the next person take over. And I thought that was the time. I had worked very, very hard, very long hours. And remember that when I came on board at Walter Reed in 2004, the war was going very strongly. And at the old Walter Reed, there would be gurneys lined up in the lobby of the old Walter Reed several days a week where the wounded soldiers would be flown in from Landstuhl, and the gurneys would be waiting in the hospital lobby to take them to where they needed to go. And there wasn't a corridor, there wasn't an elevator where you didn't see the ravages of war, and you didn't see family members who were just heartbroken at what was happening. So that was really very difficult. When we moved to Bethesda Naval, we saw less of that. But that had a pronounced effect on all of us. And so I felt that it was time to go. And I decided that I was going to simply go into private practice, but not full-time any longer.
I see. Has that been a difficult transition? Do you miss working as part of a team?
I miss cancer patients. You know, people, when I would tell somebody that I worked with cancer patients, one woman had the nerve to say to me, "Oh, I could never do that work. I'm entirely too sensitive," as if I were
not. Yeah.
I'm chopped liver.
Right.
But I saw the very best in human spirit. I saw the very best in resiliency. I saw family members and friends they all came together.
Yeah.
I saw doctors and nurses that were giving their hearts to these patients and their family members. So it was grace, and it was grace to serve those who were serving our country, and that was wonderful. So I miss working with cancer patients and their families, and I miss the dedication.
Yeah.
I'm grateful that I have the ability to work only a couple of days a week and now focus on taking care of myself.
Yeah. And what's good about this now? What do you like having those other days to do other things?
I do. I really do. I like the ability to read. I'm a huge reader, and to read, to take writing courses, to do yoga, to do nothing. It's wonderful to do nothing. To watch endless, mindless TV, you know.
But you didn't have to give up entirely what was also meaningful work.
No.
So, and are you still seeing patients that have cancer or?
I don't. I wish I could, but I don't. I mean, I'd be happy to. So now I see just traditionally what most psychologists in private practice will see. You know, problems with depression, anxiety, transitions, et cetera, et cetera.
Now, as we think about people that are coming to an age, I don't like the word retirement, but are thinking about shifting in what they do, what has your experience been in the workplace with discrimination, specifically around aging?
In my profession, I didn't see it, you know.
Because wisdom is required for your profession.
Right. So, you know, it's more the other way around, that when you're a young psychologist starting out, you know, patients, especially when they're older, will look at you like, what do you know?
Yeah.
So yeah. I actually have the benefit of being older.
Yeah.
You know, and I didn't encounter that. But I also think, and perhaps this is naive of me, but I really think that attitude is so critically important. I mean, if I had had the attitude when I went back to school, that there were things that I couldn't do because I was older, and the kids that were younger were smarter and could do better, I don't know if I would have lasted in school. So I think a lot of the constraints, not a lot, but I think some of the constraints in terms of age have to do with our attitude.
Yeah, and they're self-imposed. Or,
precisely.
Yeah, the idea that someone's going to judge you for your age.
Now, I mean, it depends certainly on the context. It depends on what industry you're going into.
How are your tech skills? Are you good at tech?
Obviously I use computers.
Yes.
They're not great, but certainly I can manage. But
I ask everyone that question.
But I think, again, for me and for what I do, it's not that important.
Yeah.
I do want to make the point that I don't think that ageism is as much of a problem as gender. So I think that I think women in general have a harder time, and older women have a harder time. That's, just my guess.
Yeah, I agree with you. Just so you know. What would you tell someone who was in a position you were when you were trying to decide it's time for me to pass along to the next person? what kind of things should they think about? How would you advise someone who is currently deciding, should I retire this year? Should I think another 5 years? Can I go out on private practice? I mean, there's a lot of questions when you're used to having something, you've been doing it over a decade. What kind of advice would you give a person in that
Well,
role?
I think that they need to. I think that they need to think about things first, practically speaking. If they have an accountant or a financial planner, to really work out whether they can afford to do this. Because when you go into private practice, you don't have coverage any longer. You know, as you do when you're working for an organization.
Right.
So I think that the practical is very important. And that's the first thing. And the second thing that I think is, you know, there are a lot of myths about retirement and how it should be. I would get, oh, now you can travel or you could do this. So I think you need to kind of dispel those myths and come back to thinking of what is it that feeds you? What is it that allows you to feel that you have a purpose? What allows you to feel whole about yourself? And that may sound a little LA woo-woo kind of.
No, I love it.
But
That's
I think it's really true. For me, I love stories. I love listening to stories. I think that we need to honor our own stories and that we need to honor other people's stories. So regardless of whether I had stayed or not, that drives me. I think I just think that that's critically important. So I think it's when you're moving from work to retirement, what do you honor for yourself and what do you honor about work?
Are you currently writing?
No, not.
You like to hear other people's stories, but
I on and off.
Yeah.
On and off.
Yeah. So you'll eventually come back to that, maybe.
I hope so.
Tell me what other myths you think people have about retirement.
I'm not sure. It sounds, there's this idea that it's going to be idyllic.
Mm-hmm.
That you're going to have all this free time and that you're going to do all the things that you never could do before. And that's not really true because zebras don't change their stripes.
Yeah, exactly.
And so, and if you're married or if you have a partner, you think that the two of you are going to do whatever, and it oftentimes doesn't come down to that. Instead, they're faced with, my God, I'm going to be with this person 24/7.
Yes, that's a challenge. The other thing that I experienced, and I will never retire, but I had a period of time where I was no longer required to be somewhere between 9 and 5.
Yeah.
And what I thought was one of the strangest things, but I've had other people tell me this, is to have it be 10 a.m. on a Monday, and you have sweatpants on, or you don't have any, have anywhere you need to go. Or the other thing that, and I now take great pleasure in this, but you show up at the grocery store and you're the only person in the aisle, and it feels like the rest of life has somehow is happening somewhere over there.
Right. Well, structure is critically important and keeps us sane.
Yeah.
And actually, when people do go into treatment for mental illness or substance abuse, the programs are always very structured. And so structure is sort of the scaffolding that keeps us together.
Yeah.
And if we start to loosen that structure when we go into retirement, then it can make us more prone to depression.
And learning how to create your own, if it's not imposed
Precisely.
on you, is how
Precisely.
to create your own
Yeah.
structure. Is there anything that you've had some very good insights just in general about aging and meaning in life. Is there anything else you would tell someone who might be a client of yours as they anticipate this next stage, which I think can be one of the happiest and most exciting in your life?
What I see with some of my patients is that they have been very used to external validation.
Mm.
They've been very used to achieving. And that's how they've defined who they are. When you go into retirement, it makes you think more about being more internal. And that can be very uncomfortable when you have spent a lifetime identifying yourself by what you've done.
Almost the more successful you've been, the harder.
Precisely.
Yeah.
Precisely.
Yeah.
And so, and in fact, I saw it at Walter Reed with officers when they had a 30-plus year working experience in the military, and oftentimes when they retired, they went into depression. Mm-hmm. So that's very tricky. I think that being able to turn that around and and feel validated for who we are, not based on what we do, can take a while.
Yes, especially if it's a skill set, like a muscle you have to develop.
Yeah, and I and I also think, depending on how old you are when you retire, I think that there are existential issues that you start to confront in the same way that my cancer patients did. Mm-hmm. And those existential issues are there regardless of whether you want to face them or not.
Exactly.
And I think that needs attention, at some point during a retirement period, because otherwise what we do to avoid it is what Brene Brown says: we eat too much, we drink too much, we shop too much, we gamble too much, whatever, we do too much avoiding.
Yeah, I like Brene Brown.
Everybody likes Brene Brown.
There is another article that you made me think of. It was in the New York Times, and it's something, I don't remember the exact title, but it's something like In Praise of Mediocrity.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
Yes. And that we used to have hobbies.
Barbara, yeah.
Yes, did you read it?
Yes.
And you have to have mediocrity, and sometimes if in years ago you'd have a hobby and you didn't expect your watercolor to be
right.
An international sensation sold at Sotheby's. You just wanted a watercolor.
Right.
And I think going back to that, it's the experience, not necessarily whether it wins the first prize or in the case of what I'm doing now, Job IQ, people say to me, oh, this could be a household brand. And, and great, but I'm doing it because I enjoy what I'm doing, talking to you.
Right.
And that, to me, I wouldn't call that mediocre. I would call that just meaningful work.
I think you bring up a really important, that's the other part that's really important. We read these articles about 95-year-old person who ran a triathlon, or Ruth Bader Ginsburg, who after both times when she was diagnosed and treated for cancer was right back on the bench.
Exactly.
I mean, please, give me a break.
Yeah.
When do we really get to just be and give ourselves a break?
Give yourself a break, exactly. And, if there's certain things, one of the things, when I exercise now, I watch television series, and I will only watch a series that's been around 3 years because I hate it when it ends and then I have to get into a new show. But I am probably one of the most experienced television watchers. I've seen a lot because I exercise about an hour every day. So that gives me a lot of TV watching time. And sometimes I get the feeling people look at me and go, how come you've seen all this series? I am exercising, but the point is that that's really fun to binge watch TV.
Of course it is.
And give yourself permission to do that.
There is a movement afoot, I hope, that is encouraging people to have compassion for themselves.
Yes.
We learn when we are very small, whether at home or in our churches or our synagogues, or to be kind to other people, but we do not learn to be kind to ourselves. And as we go into retirement, we really have to start to be kind to ourselves.
Yes.
It's critically important.
And more self-care is one of the ways we don't binge eat, or if we're taking care of ourselves, then we don't need those other things.
But it's not only taking care of, it's allowing ourselves to be kind.
Yes.
To cut ourselves some slack. Yeah. So, if we don't exercise 3 times a week, and it's okay.
Yes.
And that, I think, is really, really important.
Exactly. And do things we enjoy.
Absolutely.
Instead of things where, exercise for me is a treadmill or watching TV. It's not running a marathon.
No.
I exercise the way I like to.
Good.
And that's the point, that's the other message I think to people is as they think about pivoting in a career or cutting back, is what can they do that they really truly enjoy, and then how do they not feel guilty about it?
Right. That's right. And I think that comes back to spending so much of our lives identifying with achievement.
Yes.
And now we're going to make a change. And we're going to get to know ourselves on a different level.
Also, one other thing, it's more in our society than others or historically. So historically, if you were in an agrarian economy, you were a farmer from when you first started to help out your parents to when you were helping the family that's coming after you. You don't ever have a moment where you walk off a cliff.
Right.
You are who you are.
Right.
And we don't have quite that much clear identity in our society as we once did.
Right.
And that's just even getting out of the habit of a 9-to-5 job. That wasn't something that historically people didn't have 9-to-5 jobs.
Right.
So let me see if there's anything else I haven't asked you. Yeah, there is one more question. You maybe answered this, but I'm curious. What would you say is the most meaningful part of this stage in your life?
I think that it has been a thread throughout my adult life, and that's bearing witness. I feel that helping people to make meaning and bearing witness to their story, to who they are, is very critical for me.
That is so healing too. And all we need, I had a conversation with a friend the other day, and she knows this long story about another friend, and she said to me, "It sounds like you were really hurt by that." And that's all I needed.
That's right.
I didn't need to go into the details.
Right.
She just acknowledged
Right.
and validated.
Right.
That was a hurtful thing.
One of my colleagues told the story about her little boy. They had moved schools, and in the new school, he was on a new soccer team, and it wasn't working out. And he came home, and he was very, very upset. And the father was giving him all kinds of advice about what to do. And he turned to his mother and said, "All I want is a hug."
Yeah, exactly.
So when I see new psychologists coming up in the ranks, I try to say, this isn't about fixing. This is about being present. And they don't know what that means, but that being present is what you've just described.
And that's what comes from meditation, and that, in fact, being present and not living an unconscious life is perhaps, I'll answer my own question, but perhaps that's one of the things that you really get to explore at this stage in life too.
True, but you can certainly do it when you're younger. I started meditating in 1989, so that's
exactly
a long time.
Well, I didn't even mean meditation so much as I meant this is an opportunity to even have a little bit broader reflection.
Oh, absolutely, because you have the time to do it.
You have the time, and you hopefully have the wisdom and the experience.
If you wish to.
Yeah, if you have the intention to. That's exactly right. Is there anything else I haven't asked you, or anything that you would like to? I mean, these have been really extraordinarily profound and helpful. But is there anything else that?
No, I don't think so. I just think that that attitude is so important, and being open to different opportunities and not shutting them down, but just try. What's the worst that'll happen?
Exactly. And one of the things that I love about some of the people I've talked to, the very brave people, is that many of them have gone from what you would call a hard science type of career into something very creative.
Mm-hmm.
And they've flipped into something that's very creative. And it's like it's never too late to have a happy childhood.
Mm-hmm.
So if there's something you've wanted to do your whole life, this is the time to take the risk and see if you like it or not. But
right. What's the harm?
Exactly. What's the harm? And really, we think in terms of, we have so much life. Now we're at a point where you have to start making choices because you don't know how long you have.
That's right.
You never do, really.
No, you don't.
Thank you, Leslie, for being here.
You're very welcome.
And thank you for being with us today, too, at Job IQ Outside the Box. You can subscribe down below and check out our website for a lot more videos and information. Bye-bye.